This documentary will explain in detail the history of the Wisconsin milk strike and the struggles of the Wisconsin dairy farmers. Wisconsin was not always the leading producer of dairy. In fact, in the mid-1800s, Wisconsin's primary crop was wheat. Wheat was cheap and easy to transport across the country. Wisconsin was considered the breadbasket of America, producing 1/6 of America's wheat. However, farming methods eventually depleted the nitrogen in the soil. In addition, chinch bugs devastated Wisconsin's wheat crop. Unable to grow wheat successfully, farmers had to look for other means to make a living. During the mid-19th century, it looked as if dairy would be a profitable alternative to wheat. By 1890, 17% of Wisconsin farms were considered dairy farms, but more than 90% of Wisconsin farms raised dairy cows. The dairy industry in Wisconsin grew at a rapid rate for several reasons. Dairy farmers from New York settled in Wisconsin, bringing skills and knowledge needed for commercial dairying. The University of Wisconsin researched and developed dairy farming. German and Scandinavian immigrant families adapted the trade of dairying and specialized in making European-style cheeses, such as Swiss cheese. European cheeses became very popular in America. At the beginning of the 20th century, in addition to dairy farming, farmers grew and sold crops to resellers to make a small profit. Most family farms were self-sufficient and usually tended a small vegetable garden and grew fruit orchards to feed their families and save money. Farmers were very thrifty. For example, they would buy a 50-pound bag of flour and bake their own bread. Once the flour sacks were empty, it would be used to make clothes, also known as flour sack clothes. Anything could be made, from shirts to dresses, out of these sacks. Farmers worked very hard and took pride in their work. By 1915, the state of Wisconsin became the nation's leading producer of dairy products, such as butter and cheese. It is estimated that there were 125,000 dairy farms in Wisconsin at this time. In 1929, over 50% of farm income in Wisconsin was milk. During World War I, farmers were increasing the size of their farms and using mechanical machinery to meet increased demands around the world. After World War I, farmers were beginning to face economic difficulties because other countries demanded less supply from the farmers. Additionally, the farmers were producing an excessive amount of food. On October 28th and 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed, dropping an astonishing 25%, putting the country in an economic pandemonium. This event marked the start of the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, dairy farmers began to face some tough times. There were two kinds of dairy farmers in Wisconsin. The first were 90% of dairy farmers who sold their milk for manufactured goods such as cheese and butter. These farmers received 75 to 85 cents for 100 pounds of milk. Most of these farmers were living in poverty because it was costing more to produce the milk than what they were able to sell it for. The other 10% of dairy farmers, who were referred to as kings, sold their milk to be distributed in bottles for $1.50 per 100 pounds. Farmers selling milk for bottling were able to make a living. However, most farmers were suffering financially at this time. Another major setback was that large dairy companies were slowly forcing smaller dairy companies out of business. Tension and unrest among farmers was already occurring in other Midwest states, including Illinois, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, and Indiana. The state of New York was already experiencing violence in its farming community. Farmers were conducting milk strikes and livestock and produce embargoes. Clashes with law enforcement and farmers occurred on a regular basis. Most people were amazed that Wisconsin hadn't joined the movement earlier. Another tactic used by farmers was on farm foreclosures. When a farm was foreclosed, other farmers would purchase the foreclosed farm for pennies on the dollar and threaten anyone who submitted higher bids. After the property was sold, it would be returned to its original owner. These kinds of sales were called penny or Sears and Roebuck sales. What were the reasons that Wisconsin farmers were willing to take such drastic measures? There were three reasons. 1. The low price of milk drove many farmers into poverty. Farmers desperately needed more money to pay off their increasing debts. 2. Farm foreclosures. 3. Farmers wanted to bring their economic difficulties to the attention of the public and politicians. How did the Wisconsin farmers organize themselves for the strikes? 3 men were involved in leading the Wisconsin milk strikes. 2 men were associated with the Farmers Holiday Association, or FHA. They were Milo Reno, who was the national president of the FHA, and Arnold Gilbert, who was the head of the Wisconsin FHA. The third person was Walter M. Singler, who was the president of the Cooperative Milk Pool, which had been organized in Wisconsin to give small farmers bargaining powers with dairies. Initially, the Farmers Holiday Association and the Cooperative Milk Pool called for its members to withhold selling their milk until an agreed price was met. They were hoping that this action would get the government involved to deal with the milk pricing problem. However, not all dairy farmers were strikers, and even some strikers were selling their milk at reduced prices. This often led to roadblocks and picket lines on roads into major cities where strikers would force delivery trucks containing milk to turn around, or strikers would forcibly dump their milk. In many cases, violence occurred between strikers, non-strikers, and with law enforcement. The Wisconsin milk strikes were a partly civil war between the farmers and a fight against commercial dairies. There were 3 strikes that took place in Wisconsin in 1933. The first was in February. Striking farmers blocked roads and trains in northwestern and eastern counties of Wisconsin. The second strike was in May. Strikes occurred throughout the eastern half of Wisconsin. The strike was gaining momentum because there had not been a response from the government. The governor of Wisconsin called out guardsmen to restore order. 5,000 strikers protested in the state capital of Madison. Guardsmen used tear gas to control the crowds in the cities of Shawano and Appleton. In the city of Saukville, a striker was killed when he fell from his truck during a confrontation. In the city of Racine, a guardsman shot one striker. The third set of strikes took place October through November. Strikes spread throughout the state of Wisconsin. A striker was shot and killed by a trucker in Dane County. In Racine County, deputies fired shotguns. In several counties, picketers were arrested. 8 cheese factories were bombed and several creameries were burned to the ground. The strikes began to slow down by the beginning of November. The Wisconsin Democrat, a newspaper of Madison, Wisconsin, estimated that the farmers had lost $10 million as a result of the strikes. The New Deal was a creation of federal programs launched by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration from 1933 to 1938 to help the United States financially recover from the Great Depression. The farm strikes played an important role in pressuring the Roosevelt administration to give some kind of assistance to farmers. Many of President Roosevelt's advisors believed that the economic depression was a result of the economic slowdown of farming. Much of the New Deal was put in place to help farmers. One piece of legislation in the New Deal was the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or AAA. Congress declared that it was the policy of Congress to balance supply and demand for farm commodities so that the prices would support a decent purchasing power for farmers. AAA controlled the supply and production of 9 basic crops, which included corn, wheat, cotton, rice, peanuts, tobacco, and milk. This program used money from a new tax to pay farmers not to raise specific crops or animals. The idea was that lower production would raise prices. The AAA did put limits on milk production, and dairy prices did see a slight increase. However, low market prices and drought still made the 1930s a challenging time for most Wisconsin farmers.